Have you ever met someone who changed your entire life in a single moment? For Ezra Hawthorne, that moment came beside a mountain creek on an autumn afternoon in 1894. What he saw there would force him back into the world he'd abandoned, back into a society that had destroyed his family with nothing more than whispers and lies. And this time he'd have to choose between the safety of solitude and the dangerous path of doing what was right. The late afternoon sun bled copper across the Appalachian ridges, painting the world in shades of amber and rust. The air hung thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, that particular smell of mountains in September, when summer finally surrenders to autumn. High above the valley, where civilization thinned to nothing but deer trails and forgotten logging roads, the wilderness kept its own counsel. Ezra Hawthorne moved through this world like a piece of it. At 30 years old, he stood 6 feet 2 inches of lean muscle and calloused hands, his body shaped by 3 years of chopping wood, hauling water, and hunting game. His beard, thick and dark brown streaked with premature silver, covered the lower half of his face. He wore it long because there was no one to care, no one to judge. His hair fell past his shoulders in waves, bound back with a strip of leather when he worked, but free now as he checked his trap line. He was checking the snares along Ridge Creek, moving with the quiet efficiency of a man who'd learned to read the forest like other men read newspapers. The leather satchel on his hip held 2 rabbits already. Not a bad haul for a Tuesday. His worn boots made almost no sound on the carpet of fallen leaves. The cream-colored work shirt, stained with honest sweat and pine sap, stretched across shoulders that had grown broader in his years alone. His hands, massive and scarred from axe work and rope burns, handled the delicate mechanism of each snare with surprising gentleness. These hands had built his cabin log by log. These hands had buried his father. These hands had held his mother's trembling fingers the last time he'd visited her at the sanitarium in Charleston, where she sat in a chair by the window and didn't recognize her own son. Ezra pushed the memory away. Memories were dangerous. They made a man careless, and carelessness in the mountains could kill you as surely as a bullet. He moved down toward the creek where it bent around a stand of white birch. This was the last snare on his line, the one he'd set for mink near the water's edge. The creek ran clear and cold here, fed by springs higher up the mountain. In summer, the water dropped to a trickle, but September rains had swollen it to a respectable flow, deep enough in the center that a man could dunk his whole head if he had a mind to. That's when he heard it, a splash, not the playful sound of a fish jumping or a bird bathing. This was the heavy, urgent splash of something large moving through water with purpose or panic. Ezra froze. His right hand moved instinctively to the hunting knife at his belt. In 3 years alone, he'd learned that unexpected sounds meant one of 2 things: opportunity or danger. Either way, a man needed to be ready. Another splash, followed by a gasp that was distinctly human and distinctly female. The sound carried a note of distress that bypassed thought and went straight to instinct. Someone was in trouble. His cabin sat a mile behind him. His nearest neighbor, old Sam Mackenzie, lived 3 miles down the mountain. The town of Blackwood Hollow lay another 5 miles beyond that. No one came up this far unless they were lost or running from something. Ezra moved toward the sound, keeping low, using the birch trees as cover. The rational part of his mind told him to be cautious. The rest of him, the part shaped by his father's teachings about helping those in need, pulled him forward. He reached the birch line and peered through the white trunks. What he saw stopped him cold. In the creek, maybe 20 feet from shore, a young woman struggled in the current. But she wasn't drowning. Not exactly. She was caught. Her heavy black dress, the unmistakable habit of a Catholic nun, had snagged on something beneath the water. The sodden fabric pulled her down like an anchor. She twisted and turned, trying to free herself, her movements growing more frantic with each passing second. The afternoon light slanted through the trees and caught on her face. Even from this distance, even half submerged and panicked, Ezra could see she was young, perhaps 27 or 28, though her eyes held a weariness that made her seem older. Her hair, cropped short as per convent rules, gleamed copper red in the golden light. Her skin, pale as mountain laurel blossoms, had already taken on a bluish tinge from the cold water. She went under. Ezra didn't think. Thinking was for men with time to waste. He dropped his satchel and plunged into the creek. boots and all. The cold hit him like a fist, stealing his breath. The current, stronger than it looked, immediately tried to sweep him downstream. He fought it, pushing toward where he'd last seen her. She surfaced again, gasping, her eyes wide with terror. Those eyes. Even in her panic, even through the water streaming down her face, Ezra saw their color. Green. Not the murky green of pine needles, but the clear, bright green of new grass in spring. Her mouth opened to scream, but water rushed in instead. She choked, went under again. Ezra reached her in 3 powerful strokes. His hand found her arm, solid and real and desperately cold. He pulled her up. She came gasping, coughing, grabbing at him with the strength of drowning terror. Her fingernails dug into his shoulder through his shirt. He didn't feel it. He dove under, found the problem immediately. Her habit had wrapped around a dead branch jutting from a submerged log. The heavy wool, designed to be modest and proper on land, had become a death trap in water. He pulled his knife from its sheath, the blade sharp enough to shave with because a dull knife was more dangerous than none at all. 2 quick cuts, and the fabric parted. The current immediately tried to take the freed cloth downstream. Ezra grabbed a handful of the nun's remaining dress and kicked hard for shore. They surfaced together in the shallows. Ezra got his feet under him, lifted her bodily, and carried her the last few feet to solid ground. He set her down on a patch of sun-warmed moss near the birch trees. She collapsed forward onto her hands and knees, coughing up creek water, her whole body shaking violently. Ezra stepped back, turned away. His heart hammered in his chest, partly from exertion, partly from something else. Because in pulling her from the water, in cutting her free, he'd seen what no man should see without a woman's permission. The heavy habit, torn and clinging, revealed the simple white shift beneath. The wet fabric hid nothing. Every curve, every line of her body showed clear as day. He stared hard at the trees, his jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. Behind him he heard her breathing slow, heard the coughing subside into ragged gasps. When she spoke, her voice came out hoarse and strained, barely more than a whisper. "You saw me." 3 words, simple, devastating. Ezra kept his back turned. "I saw a woman in danger, that's all. You saw me without my habit, without—" She coughed again, a wet, painful sound. "You saw me." Ezra took off his heavy work coat, the one he'd thrown on this morning against the mountain chill. He turned just enough to extend it behind him without looking. "Take this. Cover yourself." A pause, then small, cold fingers brushed his as she took the coat. He heard rustling, the sound of wet fabric being arranged, of his coat's leather sleeves sliding over shaking arms. "You can turn around." He did slowly. She sat on the moss, wrapped in his coat that hung huge on her small frame. She'd gotten the habit's top piece off somehow, revealing that copper-red hair plastered to her skull. Without the coif, without the layers that made nuns look ageless and uniform, she looked achingly young. Water still dripped from her face. Her lips had taken on a bluish tinge. "You're freezing," Ezra said. His voice came out rougher than he intended, scraped raw by the creek water and something else he couldn't name. "I need to get you warm." "I know." She hugged his coat tighter around herself. "But you need to understand something first." She looked up at him, those green eyes direct and fierce despite the shivers racking her body. "You saw me. By the laws of Mother Superior, by the rules of my convent, by the eyes of this community, I am now defiled. Simply because a man saw me in a state of undress." Ezra's brow furrowed. "That's ridiculous. I was saving your life." "I know." A bitter smile touched her blue lips. "But ridiculous or not, it's the truth we live with. And you know something about how truth matters less than what people believe, don't you, Ezra Hawthorne?" He stiffened. She knew his name. She knew who he was, which meant she knew the story. Everyone in Blackwood Hollow knew the story. How Daniel Hawthorne had been accused of burning down Luther Blackwood's warehouse 3 years ago. How the whole town had turned against him. How he'd taken his own shotgun into the barn one October morning and never came out. How Ezra's mother, Ruth, had broken like a china doll dropped on stone, her mind shattering into pieces that no doctor could put back together. "How do you know me?" His voice had gone flat, emotionless, the tone he used when he needed to feel nothing. "I know the story. Everyone knows the story." She coughed again. I'm sorry about your father, about your mother, about all of it. Ezra didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Sorry didn't bring back the dead or restore the mad. She struggled to her feet, wavering like a sapling in wind. Ezra moved instinctively to steady her, but stopped himself. Touching her, even to help, might make things worse. She saw his hesitation and laughed, a sound with no humor in it. Too late for propriety now. You've already ruined me according to their rules. She took a shaky breath. My name is Magdalene O'Brien, but everyone calls me Maggie. O'Brien, Ezra knew that name too. Patrick O'Brien had died in the mine collapse 11 years ago, one of 7 men who never came home, which would make Maggie 16 when her father died, 27 now. Ezra had been 19, still working as a logger then, still believing the world made sense. Patrick O'Brien's daughter, he said. You remember him? I remember. Everyone remembered. The collapse had been bad. 7 men buried under tons of rock and earth. The whole town had mourned. But mourning didn't change anything. The mine opened back up 2 weeks later. Men still needed truce. Families still needed food. Maggie nodded, then swayed dangerously. Ezra caught her elbow before he could stop himself. Her skin felt like ice through his coat sleeve. We need to get you warm, he said, now, before hypothermia sets in. Your cabin? Her teeth chattered. A mile up the ridge. Can you walk? I'll walk or I'll die here. Either way, you've complicated both our lives, Ezra Hawthorne. But she took a step, then another, leaning on his arm with a grip that surprised him with its strength. They made slow progress through the forest. Ezra matched his pace to hers, resisting the urge to simply carry her. He'd already violated enough rules today. Best not to add more fuel to the fire that would surely come when her absence was discovered. Why were you alone? He asked as they climbed. The question had been nagging at him. Nuns didn't wander the mountains alone. They traveled in pairs at minimum, and certainly not this far from town. Maggie's breath labored gaps, whether from cold or exertion he couldn't tell. I was collecting medicinal herbs with Sister Bernadette. She's older, has trouble with the climb, twisted her ankle 2 miles back. I told her to wait while I went ahead for Solomon's seal. We need it for her joints. And you got lost. I got lost. She stumbled over a root. Ezra caught her, his big hand spanning her entire back. The paths all look the same up here. I found the creek, thought I could follow it down. Then I was thirsty and hot, and the water looked so clear. You took off your habit to cool down. The top part, yes, it was just going to be for a moment. I didn't think anyone would. She stopped walking, turned to look at him. But you came, and now we're both in trouble. They reached his cabin as true dusk began to settle over the mountains. It wasn't much to look at. A single room built from logs he'd cut himself, chinked with mud and moss. The roof was cedar shake, the chimney river stone. A small porch faced east to catch the morning sun. Behind the cabin, a lean-to sheltered his horse, a patient bay mare named Ruth after his mother. Ezra pushed open the door. The interior was dim, smelling of wood smoke and coffee and the sage he'd hung to dry from the rafters. One room served as everything: bedroom, kitchen, living space. A narrow bed stood against one wall, covered with quilts his mother had made before her mind broke. A table and 2 chairs occupied the center. The fireplace dominated the far wall, cold now but laid ready with kindling and split oak. Maggie stood in the doorway, dripping creek water onto his threshold. She looked around with those sharp green eyes, taking in the sparse furnishings, the shelves lined with books, the rifle above the mantel, the orderly bachelor existence of a man who expected no visitors. It's not much, Ezra said, suddenly aware of the poverty of it, the loneliness built into every corner. It's warm, or it will be. She stepped inside, still wrapped in his coat. Build the fire. He did, grateful for something to do with his hands. The kindling caught quickly, fed by the larger splits. Within minutes, flames danced in the hearth, throwing golden light across the rough plank floor. Heat began to fill the small space. Ezra turned to find Maggie standing by the fire, his coat still wrapped around her, but her expression troubled. The firelight caught in her wet hair, turning it from copper to flame. You need to change out of those wet clothes, he said. You'll catch pneumonia otherwise. Into what? I didn't bring a traveling wardrobe. The attempt at humor fell flat, weighed down by chattering teeth. Ezra went to the trunk at the foot of his bed, pulled out his spare shirt and a pair of wool pants with a drawstring waist. He set them on the chair. These will be too big, but they're dry. I'll step outside while you change. Ezra, she said his name like a question and a statement at once. You understand what this means, don't you? If anyone finds out I spent the night here alone with you, it won't matter that you were being decent. It won't matter that you saved my life. They'll assume the worst. Mother Superior will expel me from the convent. The town will call me a fallen woman. And you, she met his eyes, they already destroyed your family once with rumors. This will finish what they started. Ezra stood very still, the weight of her words settling over him like snow. She was right. He knew she was right. This town, these people, they ran on gossip the way mills ran on water. Once a story started flowing, it gained momentum, power, inevitability. It didn't matter what had really happened. What mattered was what people would say happened. And they'd say Ezra Hawthorne, the son of a suicide and a madwoman, had defiled a nun. Then don't tell them, he said finally. Change into dry clothes. Sleep by the fire. Tomorrow morning, I'll take you back to the trail. You tell Sister Bernadette you got lost, spent a cold night in a cave, found your way back at dawn. Simple. Maggie shook her head slowly. You think Sister Bernadette will believe that? She'll have sent searchers, and when they find out I was missing all night, they'll want to know where I was, who I was with. She took a step closer to him. You're a good man, Ezra Hawthorne. I can see it in how you turned your back by the creek, in how you offered your coat without hesitation, in how you're trained to protect me now. But good men finish last in this world. Good men end up like your father. The fire crackled loud in the silence that followed. Outside, an owl called, hunting in the gathering dark. Ezra felt something rising in his chest, something he'd kept locked down for 3 years. Anger, not at her, at the unfairness of it all, at a world where saving someone could destroy you both. What do you want me to do? The question came out harsh. Let you freeze? Send you back tonight in wet clothes to die of exposure? I'm damned either way, so I might as well be damned for keeping you alive. To his surprise, Maggie smiled, a real smile this time, sad but genuine. There, that's the truth, isn't it? Sometimes there's no good choice. Sometimes you just have to pick which kind of trouble you can live with. She picked up the dry clothes from the chair. Turn around, let me change. Then we'll figure this out together. Ezra turned his back, heard the rustle of wet fabric being peeled away, the quiet sounds of her dressing in his oversized clothes. He stared at the wall where he'd hung his father's tools, hammer, saw, square, level, tools for building. His father had been a builder before the accusations, before the shame, before the shotgun. You can turn around now. She looked like a child playing dress-up in her father's clothes. His shirt hung to her knees. She'd rolled the sleeves up 6 times and they still covered her hands. The pants, cinched tight with the drawstring, pooled around her feet. But she was dry, and the color was already returning to her cheeks. Thank you, she said simply. Ezra nodded, not trusting his voice. He hung her wet habit near the fire to dry, trying not to think about the intimacy of handling a woman's clothing, even clothing designed to hide everything. He put coffee on to boil in his battered tin pot, found the cornbread he'd made yesterday, cut 2 thick slices, added some dried venison from his stores. It wasn't much, but it was food, and food would help her body fight the cold. They ate in silence at first, the awkwardness of strangers forced into unwanted intimacy. But slowly, as the food warmed them both, as the fire crackled and the coffee steamed in their cups, something shifted. Tell me about the books, Maggie said, gesturing to the shelves. I didn't expect to find so many in a mountain cabin. They were my father's. I brought them up here when he didn't finish, didn't need to. He believed in education. Said a man without books was a man without windows. What are you reading now? Whitman, Leaves of Grass. Maggie's eyebrows rose. Poetry? That surprises me. Why, because I look like a brute? There was no heat in the question, just curiosity. Because most men I know think poetry is foolishness. She sipped her coffee, made a face at its strength, drank anyway. What do you like about Whitman? Ezra considered the question, surprised she'd asked it. He writes about things as they are, not as people wish them to be. He sees beauty in ordinary moments, in grass, in the human body, in death as much as life. He doesn't lie to make things comfortable. I exist as I am. That is enough, Maggie quoted softly. If no other in the world be aware, I sit content. She met his eyes across the table. That's from Song of Myself. We studied it briefly at the convent, before Mother Superior decided it was too sensual for proper young women. You read Whitman? I read everything I could get my hands on before I entered St. Catherine's. My mother was from Ireland. She taught me to read from her father's books when I was small. After she, Maggie stopped, looked down at her cup. After she remarried, books were my escape. The way she said remarried carried weight. Ezra recognized it, the weight of things left unsaid because saying them would hurt too much. Your mother's husband, he said carefully. He wasn't kind. He was a drunk and a bully. When I turned 16, he tried to sell me to Clayton Blackwood in payment for debts. She said it matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. That's when I ran to the convent. Mother Superior took me in. I've been there ever since. Clayton Blackwood. The name landed between them like a stone dropped in still water. Clayton, son of Luther Blackwood, the man who'd accused Ezra's father. Clayton, who now ran the mining operations and half the businesses in Blackwood Hollow. Clayton, who collected debts and grudges with equal fervor. You know him? Maggie said, reading Ezra's expression. Of course you do. Everyone knows the Blackwoods. I know him. Ezra's hands tightened around his coffee cup. His father destroyed mine. I imagine the son learned well from the father. He did. Maggie's voice had gone quiet, almost distant. Clayton still claims he has rights to me. Says my stepfather owed his family $800. Says I'm payment on that debt. She looked up, and in her eyes Ezra saw an echo of his own trapped in desperation. That's why I have to take final vows. Once I'm fully professed, once I belong to God in the eyes of the law, Clayton can't touch me. I'll be safe. Is that what you want, to be a nun? The question hung in the air between them. Outside, full darkness had fallen. The cabin windows showed nothing but blackness and their own reflections in the glass. I want to be safe, Maggie said finally. Whether that's the same as wanting to be a nun, I honestly don't know anymore. They fell silent again, but it was a different silence now. The silence of two people who'd recognized something in each other. Some shared understanding of what it meant to be trapped, to be hunted, to be forced into corners by circumstances beyond control. Ezra stood, moved to the door. You should sleep. Take the bed, I'll be on the porch. Ezra, it's October. You'll freeze out there. I've slept in worse. He grabbed a quilt from the chest. Lock the door after me. Don't open it unless you hear my voice. Why are you doing this? The question stopped him at the threshold. You could have left me in that creek. You could refuse to help me now. Instead, you're giving up your bed, your warmth, your safety. Ezra turned back to look at her, small and vulnerable in his oversized clothes, standing in his cabin with firelight painting shadows on her face. Why was he helping her? Because his father had taught him to help those in need. Because she reminded him of himself, trapped by other people's choices. Because those green eyes held a spark of defiance that said she was more than the circumstances that tried to define her. Because it's the right thing to do, he said. And because I'm tired of running from doing right just because it might be dangerous. He stepped out into the cold night before she could respond. The door closed behind him. He heard the bolt slide home. Good. She was safe for tonight at least. Ezra settled into his rocking chair on the porch, wrapped the quilt around his shoulders, and stared out at the darkness. Somewhere down the mountain, Sister Bernadette would be raising alarms. Somewhere in Blackwood Hollow, Clayton Blackwood would hear about a missing nun. Somewhere in the sanitarium in Charleston, his mother sat by a window, her mind lost in corridors no one could map. And here he sat, having thrown himself directly into the path of the very destruction he'd been hiding from for 3 years. All because a woman with copper hair and green eyes had gotten tangled in a creek. The smart thing would be to take her back at dawn, drop her at the tree line where she'd be found, and disappear back into his mountains before questions could be asked. The smart thing would be to protect himself first. But Ezra had learned something in these 3 years alone. The smart thing and the right thing were rarely the same, and he'd already watched one good man destroy himself trying to do right in a wrong world. Maybe it was time to find out if doing right could actually win for once. The night deepened, stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. An owl called from the pines, hunting. Life continuing, indifferent to human troubles. Inside the cabin, through the single window, Ezra could see Maggie moving about, settling in for sleep. The firelight caught on her hair, turning it to living flame. She looked small and alone in there. Then again, he'd been small and alone for 3 years now. Maybe that's what they both needed to stop being. Dawn would come soon enough, and with it, all the complications he'd invited by choosing mercy over caution. But for tonight, in this moment, a woman was safe and warm who might otherwise be dead. And that, Ezra decided, was enough. He pulled the quilt tighter and let the mountain darkness wrap around him like an old friend. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. Tonight he'd done right. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to change everything. Dawn came to the mountains the way it always did, slowly at first. Then all at once, the eastern sky bled from black to indigo to rose, painting the ridge lines in shades of copper and gold. Ezra had been awake for hours watching the transformation, his body stiff from a night in the rocking chair, but his mind alert. The cabin door opened. Maggie stood framed in the doorway, still wearing his oversized clothes, her copper hair catching the first rays of sun. She'd folded her habit into a neat bundle under her arm. The black fabric had dried overnight by the fire, though it would never be the same. The tears Ezra's knife had made showed clearly in the morning light. "You didn't sleep," she said. Not a question. Slept enough. Ezra stood, his joints protesting. At 30, he was too young to feel this old, but mountain living aged a man in ways that city life never could. "Coffee's ready inside. I kept the fire going." They moved inside together, an awkward dance of two people learning the boundaries of unexpected intimacy. Ezra poured coffee while Maggie stood by the window, looking down the mountain toward the valley where Blackwood Hollow sat nestled in morning mist. "They'll be searching for me by now," she said. "Sister Bernadette will have told Mother Superior I never returned. They'll have men combing the mountains. Then we should get you back before they come this far." Ezra handed her a cup. Their fingers brushed. Both pulled away too quickly, aware of the danger in even that small touch. "Ezra." She turned from the window to face him. In the morning light, he could see the determination in her eyes, the set of her jaw. This was a woman who'd made a decision. "I've been thinking all night about what happens when I go back. You tell them you got lost. You spent the night in a cave. You found your way at dawn. And when they see my torn habit, when they ask why I'm hours late, when Sister Bernadette describes exactly where she last saw me, and the searchers realize that's nowhere near where I claim to have been." Maggie shook her head. "They'll know I'm lying. And when they press, when Mother Superior demands the truth under threat of expulsion, what then?" Ezra had no answer. She was right. The lie wouldn't hold. It never did. "There's another way," Maggie said. Her voice had gone quiet, intense. "A way that protects us both. But you're not going to like it." Before she could explain, the sound of horses reached them. Multiple horses, moving through the forest below the cabin. Men's voices calling out, searching. They'd come faster than Ezra had expected. He moved to the window, careful to stay back from the glass where he couldn't be seen. Through the trees, he counted 4 riders. He recognized them all. 2 were miners from Blackwood's operations. The third was Jacob Miller, who ran the general store. The fourth made Ezra's blood run cold. Sister Bernadette riding side saddle on a gentle mare, her habit stark black against the autumn colors. "They're here," Ezra said. "Sister Bernadette and 3 men from town." Maggie moved beside him, looked out. Her face went pale. "This is worse than I thought. If Sister Bernadette is with them, Mother Superior sent them. This isn't just a search party. This is an inquisition." And the riders were perhaps 200 yards below, moving methodically up the mountain, checking every clearing, every possible shelter. They'd reached the cabin in minutes. "The other way you mentioned," Ezra said urgently. What is it? Maggie turned to him. You tell them we were together, that you found me yesterday, brought me here for shelter, that she took a breath, that we had an understanding before I entered the convent, that you came back for me. That's a lie. Yes, but it's a lie that gives us both a chance. She grabbed his arm, her small hand fierce on his forearm. Don't you see? If they think we have a prior relationship, if they believe there was something between us before my vows, then this becomes a romance, not a scandal. Star-crossed lovers instead of a fallen woman and the man who ruined her. They'll never believe it. They will if we both tell the same story. They will if we're convincing. Her eyes searched his face. Ezra, I know what I'm asking. I know it's unfair, but I don't have any other options. And neither do you, because the moment they find me here, in your cabin, wearing your clothes, your life becomes hell whether you help me or not. The horses were closer now. Ezra could hear individual voices. One of the miners was making a crude joke about nuns and mountain men. Jacob Miller told him to shut his mouth. Ezra's mind raced. Everything Maggie said was true. The moment those men saw her here, the story would write itself in their minds. Nothing he said would change it. At best, he'd be the hermit who'd taken advantage of a lost nun. At worst, they'd assume force, violence. Either way, he'd hang or rot in prison while his mother sat in Charleston, waiting for a son who'd never come. But if there was a prior relationship, if Maggie had been his sweetheart before she took refuge in the convent, if he'd spent 3 years on this mountain pining for her, then suddenly the narrative changed. It became almost romantic, the kind of story that made women sigh and men grudgingly approve. It was still a lie, but it was a lie that might let them both survive. What about your vows? He asked. If we tell this story, you can't stay at St. Catherine's. I know. Something flickered across her face. Relief? Fear? Both? But maybe that's not the worst thing. Maybe I've been hiding there the same way you've been hiding up here. Maybe we're both done running. The first rider broke through the tree line into Ezra's clearing. It was one of the miners, a heavy-set man named Thomas Riley. He pulled up short when he saw the cabin, then spotted Ezra standing on the porch. Hawthorne, Riley called out. You seen a nun come through here? Young woman, red hair, been missing since yesterday? This was it, the moment that would determine everything that followed. Ezra could feel Maggie behind him in the cabin, waiting. He thought of his father, who'd told the truth and died for it. He thought of his mother, driven mad by other people's lies. He thought of 3 years alone, hiding from a world that had already judged him guilty. And he thought of the woman in his cabin who'd looked at him with those green eyes and asked him to be brave enough to lie for both of them. I've seen her, Ezra called back. She's here. The effect was instantaneous. Riley sat up straighter in his saddle. The other riders emerged from the trees. Sister Bernadette gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Jacob Miller, who'd known Ezra's father, looked like he'd been punched in the gut. She's here? Sister Bernadette found her voice. Sister Magdalene is in your cabin? She is. Ezra stepped off the porch into the morning sun. Let them see him clearly. Let them see he wasn't hiding. I found her yesterday evening, caught in the creek. Her habit was torn. She was half frozen. I brought her here, gave her dry clothes, kept her warm through the night. You? Sister Bernadette couldn't seem to finish the sentence. Her face cycled through shock, horror, disgust. You kept her here? Alone? All night? I kept her alive, Ezra's voice carried across the clearing, which is more than she'd be if I'd left her in that creek to freeze. The cabin door opened. Maggie stepped out, still wearing Ezra's shirt and pants, her torn habit clutched in her arms. She looked small and vulnerable and utterly unashamed. When she spoke, her voice rang clear. He's telling the truth. Ezra saved my life, and he conducted himself with complete honor. Sister Bernadette stared at her. Maggie, child, do you understand what you're saying? Do you understand what this looks like? I understand perfectly, sister. Maggie walked to stand beside Ezra. She didn't touch him, but she stood close enough that the message was clear. And I understand that Ezra Hawthorne is the most decent man I've ever known. One of the miners, the one who'd been making crude jokes, laughed. Decent? Is that what we're calling it now? Riley shot him a look. Shut it, Davies. But the damage was done. Ezra could see it in their faces, the way the story was already forming in their minds. The hermit and the nun, a sordid little tale to tell over drinks at the tavern. By nightfall, half the town would know. By tomorrow, everyone would have an opinion. We need to get you back to St. Catherine's, Sister Bernadette said, her voice strained. Mother Superior will want to speak with you immediately. I know. Maggie handed her habit to Ezra. Can you bring this? I'll need to change before we reach town. It was a small gesture, giving him the habit to carry, but it spoke volumes. It said they were together in this. It said she trusted him. Ezra took the bundle of black cloth. I'll saddle my horse. I'm coming with her. That's not necessary, Sister Bernadette said quickly. It is. Ezra met her eyes, because there are things Mother Superior needs to know. Things that explain why Maggie was up here. Why she came to me. Sister Bernadette's expression shifted. Confusion now mixed with the shock. What things? Things best discussed in private, Maggie said. Not here in front of everyone. The implication was clear. There was more to this story, a history, and it was none of these men's business. Riley, who'd known Patrick O'Brien back in the day, looked at Maggie with something almost like pity. We'll escort you both down. Make sure you get there safe. The ride down the mountain took an hour. Maggie rode behind Ezra on his mare, her arms around his waist for balance. The contact was unavoidable, necessary, and utterly improper. Sister Bernadette rode beside them, her face a mask of controlled distress. The three miners ranged around them like guards, though whether they were protecting Maggie or preventing her escape, Ezra couldn't tell. No one spoke. The only sounds were hoofbeats, bird song, and the whisper of wind through turning leaves. As they descended, Ezra's mind worked furiously. They'd committed to the lie now, but they needed details. A coherent story that would hold up under Mother Superior's questioning. They needed to coordinate to make sure their versions matched. He felt Maggie's forehead press against his back, just for a moment. A silent communication. She was thinking the same thing. When they reached the point where the trail widened, Maggie spoke quietly. Her voice meant only for him. We met 2 years ago at my father's grave. I was putting flowers. You were visiting your mother at the sanitarium and stopped at the cemetery. Ezra caught on immediately. We talked about loss, about fathers who died too soon. We met again, a few times, always by chance, always brief, until it wasn't chance anymore. Until I realized I was looking for you. Maggie's arms tightened around his waist. But I was already committed to the convent, and you were already living on the mountain, hiding from the world. So we stayed apart, for both our sakes. Until yesterday, when I got lost and ended up at your creek. She paused. Is this story good enough to save us? It has to be. Because Ezra couldn't think of anything better, and they were rapidly running out of time. St. Catherine's Convent sat at the base of the mountain, a gray stone building that looked more like a fortress than a house of worship. High walls surrounded a central courtyard. Narrow windows stared out like judgmental eyes. The whole structure radiated an air of severity, of rules enforced and pleasures denied. Mother Superior Agatha Whitmore waited in the courtyard, flanked by 2 younger nuns. She was a tall, gaunt woman in her early 60s, with a face like carved granite and eyes that seemed to see straight through lies to the sin beneath. When the riders entered the courtyard, her gaze fixed immediately on Maggie. Sister Magdalene. The voice was cold as January frost. So you've returned. Yes, Mother Superior. Maggie slid down from Ezra's horse. She stood straight, shoulders back, chin up. No cowering, no apologies yet. Mother Superior's eyes shifted to Ezra. And you brought a man with you. How convenient. Ezra dismounted, handed the reins to one of the miners. I'm Ezra Hawthorne, Mother Superior. I found Sister Magdalene yesterday when she was in danger. I kept her safe through the night. Now I've brought her back to you, as was right. How noble. The sarcasm dripped like poison. And I suppose you expect gratitude for keeping one of my novices in your isolated cabin for an entire night? For clothing her in men's garments? For, she waved a hand at Maggie, whatever else may have occurred? Nothing occurred, Maggie said sharply. Ezra Hawthorne behaved with complete propriety. Did he? Mother Superior descended the 3 steps from the main building, moving toward them with the inevitability of judgment itself. Tell me, Sister Magdalene, what were you doing so far up the mountain? Sister Bernadette says she told you to wait, that she specifically instructed you not to go on alone. I was collecting Solomon's seal. We needed it. You were disobeying orders, as you have a habit of doing. Mother Superior circled them slowly, a predator assessing prey. 3 years you've been with us, Maggie. 3 years of instruction, of prayer, of preparation for your final vows. And in all that time, I've never been convinced you truly had a calling. You came to us running from something, and now it seems what you were running from has caught up with you. Ezra felt anger rising in his chest. The way this woman spoke to Maggie, the contempt in her voice, the assumption of guilt. It was the same tone the town had used with his father. She wasn't running from me, Ezra said. She was running to safety, from Clayton Blackwood. The courtyard went silent. Even the nuns seemed to stop breathing. Mother Superior's eyes narrowed to slits. What did you say? Clayton Blackwood. Ezra took a step forward. Let her see he wasn't intimidated. He claims he has a contract that Maggie's stepfather sold her to him to cover debts. She came here to escape that, to find protection in vows. Mother Superior's face had gone carefully blank. Too blank. I know nothing of any contract. Don't you? Ezra pressed. Because I'm betting Clayton Blackwood has been very generous to St. Catherine's over the years. Very interested in keeping close ties with the convent where his property resides. It was a guess, but an educated one. The Blackwoods bought everything, controlled everything. Why would a convent be any different? The flash of anger in Mother Superior's eyes told him he'd struck home. How dare you come here and make accusations? You, the son of a thief in a suicide. You who live like an animal in the woods. You have the audacity to judge this institution? I have the audacity to protect an innocent woman from being used as a pawn. Ezra's voice had gone dangerously quiet. Which is more than you're doing. Before Mother Superior could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. That's quite enough. A man emerged from the convent's chapel, a priest in his late 50s with iron-gray hair and kind eyes. He wore the simple black cassock of a parish priest, not the ornate vestments of a bishop, but he carried himself with natural authority. Father Sullivan, Mother Superior said, her tone suddenly respectful. I didn't realize you were on the grounds. I came to hear confessions. Father Brennan Sullivan looked from Mother Superior to Ezra to Maggie, his gaze missing nothing. But it seems I've arrived in the midst of a different kind of truth-telling. Perhaps we should move this discussion somewhere more private. It wasn't really a suggestion. Within minutes, they were in Mother Superior's office, a Spartan room dominated by a large wooden desk and a crucifix that seemed to stare down in perpetual disappointment. Maggie and Ezra sat in chairs before the desk. Mother Superior stood behind it, her back rigid. Father Sullivan positioned himself by the window. Neutral ground. Now, Father Sullivan said gently, suppose someone tells me what actually happened. Starting with you, my child. He looked at Maggie. Maggie took a breath. Then she told the story they'd constructed. How she'd met Ezra 2 years ago at the cemetery. How they'd talked, met again, formed a connection. How she'd already been committed to the convent path by then, and he to his mountain solitude. How they'd stayed apart, tried to do the right thing. How yesterday's accident had brought them back together. She told it well, with just enough detail to be convincing, just enough emotion to be believable. Ezra watched Mother Superior's face as Maggie spoke. The older woman's expression cycled through disbelief, anger, calculation. When Maggie finished, Father Sullivan turned to Ezra. And you, son? Is this your understanding of events as well? Yes, Father. Ezra met the priest's eyes. Something passed between them, an unspoken communication. The priest knew they were lying, but he was choosing to accept the lie anyway. Why? I see. Father Sullivan folded his hands. Then it seems we have a situation that requires careful consideration. Sister Magdalene, you haven't taken your final vows yet, is that correct? Correct, Father, I'm still a novice. which means you can leave the convent at any time without canonical penalty. He looked at Mother Superior. Isn't that right? Mother Superior's lips pressed into a thin line. Technically, yes, but it's highly irregular. Many things in life are irregular. Father Sullivan moved from the window, his presence somehow filling the room. It seems to me that if Sister Magdalene has a prior attachment, if her heart was never fully committed to religious life, then it would be wrong to force final vows. Would you agree? Father, with respect, we don't know that this attachment is real. We only have their word. Are you calling them liars? Father Sullivan's voice remained gentle, but steel underneath. Mother Superior hesitated. In that hesitation, Ezra saw the truth. She knew about Clayton Blackwood's interest in Maggie. She might even know about the contract, the money. And Father Sullivan had just given her a way out, a way to wash her hands of the whole complicated mess. I'm saying, Mother Superior finally responded, that this requires investigation, prayer, discernment. Of course, Father Sullivan smiled, which is why I propose this. Sister Magdalene will remain here at the convent under your care for a period of reflection. Let's say 1 week. During that time, she'll pray about her path. Consider whether her calling is truly to religious life or to marriage. At the end of the week, she'll make her decision. If she chooses to leave, she'll do so with the church's blessing and no stain on her character. If she chooses to stay and take final vows, we'll consider this incident a test of faith that she passed. He looked at Ezra. Does that seem fair to you, Mr. Hawthorne? It was more than fair. It was a gift. Father Sullivan was offering them time, a framework for Maggie to leave the convent without scandal, a way forward that didn't destroy either of them. Very fair, Father, Ezra said. Maggie? Father Sullivan asked. Yes, Father. Thank you. Mother Superior looked like she'd swallowed vinegar, but she nodded. 1 week. But during that time, Sister Magdalene will be confined to the convent grounds. No visitors, no contact with the outside world. Except for confession, Father Sullivan said smoothly. She should have access to the sacraments during this time of discernment. Another small victory. Confession meant privacy, meant she could talk to Father Sullivan away from Mother Superior's watchful eyes. The meeting ended. Ezra was escorted out by one of the nuns, a middle-aged woman with a kind face who introduced herself as Sister Bernadette. I'll watch over her, Sister Bernadette whispered as they walked through the courtyard. She's a good girl, no matter what Mother Superior thinks. She deserves happiness. Thank you, Sister. At the convent gates, Ezra paused, looked back at the gray stone walls that now held Maggie prisoner, at least for a week. What would happen in that week? Would their hastily constructed story hold? Would Clayton Blackwood hear about this and make his own moves? Old Sam Mackenzie was waiting outside the gates, sitting on his horse, whittling a piece of wood. He looked up when Ezra emerged, his weathered face creased with concern. Heard there was excitement at St. Catherine's, Sam said. Figured you might need a friend. How'd you hear already? Son, this is Blackwood Hollow. A sparrow can't fart without the whole town knowing by noon. Sam tucked his knife away. So, you and a nun. That's a new one, even for you. Despite everything, Ezra almost smiled. It's complicated. Love usually is. Sam urged his horse into a walk. Ezra mounted his mare and fell in beside him. Question is, what are you going to do about it? What do you mean? I mean, you just told the whole town you've been secretly in love with a nun for 2 years. Now she's got a week to decide her future. What's your plan? Ezra hadn't thought that far ahead. He'd been so focused on surviving the immediate crisis that he hadn't considered what came next. I don't have a plan, he admitted. Then you better come up with one. Sam gave him a look, the kind of look that had seen decades and wasn't fooled by much. Because Clayton Blackwood won't sit idle. He'll have heard by now that his prize is slipping away. And that boy doesn't take losing well. Just like his father. The mention of Luther Blackwood sent a chill through Ezra. You knew him, Luther. You worked at the mine when my father was accused. I did. Sam was quiet for a moment. I also know your father didn't set that fire. Everyone who worked there knew. The warehouse was old, wiring was shot, Luther was too cheap to fix it, fire was bound to happen eventually. But Luther saw an opportunity to collect insurance and get rid of a man who'd been asking too many questions about safety violations. This was the first time anyone had said it out loud. The first time anyone had confirmed what Ezra had always suspected. Why didn't anyone speak up? The old bitterness crept into his voice. Why did everyone just let him die? Because Luther Blackwood signs the paychecks, son. He owns the mine, the company store, half the houses in town. Men with families can't afford to be heroes. Sam's voice was heavy with old guilt. I'm not proud of it, but that's the truth. They rode in silence for a while, the horses' hooves clopping rhythmically on the hard-packed road. Blackwood Hollow spread before them, a town of maybe 300 souls nestled in the valley. From this distance, it looked almost peaceful. But Ezra knew better. Beneath the peaceful surface ran currents of power and fear, of debts owed and silence bought. There's something else you should know, Sam said as they approached the edge of town, about Maggie's father, Patrick O'Brien. Ezra looked at him. What about him? The mine collapse that killed him. It wasn't an accident. The words hung in the air like smoke. What? Patrick had been documenting safety violations, keeping records. He was going to go to the state inspectors, blow the whistle on the whole operation. Sam's jaw tightened. 2 weeks before he was set to testify, that tunnel collapsed. 7 men died, including everyone who'd been helping Patrick gather evidence. Ezra felt something cold settle in his stomach. You're saying Blackwood killed them, deliberately. I'm saying it's mighty convenient when your accusers all get buried under a few tons of rock. Sam pulled his horse to a stop. And I'm saying that Maggie is Patrick O'Brien's daughter, which makes her dangerous to the Blackwoods in more ways than one. If she knows anything her father told her, if she has any of his documents, she'd be a threat. Exactly. So Clayton claiming her as payment for debts? That's not just greed, that's insurance. Keep your enemies close, especially when they're the daughter of a man you murdered. The full picture was starting to come together now, and it was uglier than Ezra had imagined. Maggie wasn't just running from an unwanted marriage, she was running from people who might need her silent permanently. Does she know, Ezra asked, about her father's death not being an accident? I don't know. She was 16 when it happened. Patrick might have kept it from her, tried to protect her. Sam looked at Ezra with those faded blue eyes that had seen too much. But now she's involved with you, and you're the son of another man the Blackwoods destroyed. That makes you both targets. A shout interrupted them. Down the main street of Blackwood Hollow, a commotion was building. A crowd gathering in front of the mining company office. At the center of it, Ezra could see a tall figure in an expensive suit, Clayton Blackwood. Even from this distance, Ezra recognized him. Tall like his father had been, but softer, well-fed on other people's labor. Dark hair slicked back with pomade, clean-shaven, manicured, everything about him speaking of money and power. And he was angry. Even from here, Ezra could see it in the set of his shoulders, the aggressive jut of his jaw. Looks like word reached him, Sam muttered. You want to avoid this? We can go around. Every instinct Ezra had screamed at him to do exactly that, to avoid confrontation, to slip away before Clayton saw him. It's what he'd been doing for 3 years, avoiding, hiding, staying safe. But something had changed. Maybe it was Maggie's courage in standing beside him this morning. Maybe it was finally learning the truth about his father. Maybe it was just being tired of running. No, Ezra said, I'm done avoiding Blackwoods. He urged his horse forward. Sam, after a moment's hesitation, followed. Clayton saw them coming. His head snapped up, eyes locking onto Ezra with laser focus. The crowd around him quieted, sensing drama. Hawthorne, Clayton's voice carried down the street. You have some nerve showing your face in this town. Ezra brought his mare to a stop 20 feet from Clayton. Close enough to talk, far enough to react if things turned violent. Last I checked, this was still a free country. I can ride where I please. Can you? Clayton took 3 steps forward. Up close, his fury was palpable. Can you also steal nuns from convents? Is that on your list of rights? I didn't steal anyone. I saved a woman's life. You ruined her. Clayton's voice rose. Sister Magdalene was pure, innocent, protected. And you defiled her with your presence, your touch, your... He seemed to choke on the words. Ezra kept his voice level. I kept her from freezing to death in a creek. If that's defilement, then I'm guilty. You're guilty of more than that. Clayton came closer, close enough that Ezra could smell the whiskey on his breath. It was barely past noon. Maggie O'Brien belongs to me. Her stepfather signed a contract. I have legal claim. She's not property. In the eyes of the law, she is. Her stepfather owed my family $800. The contract states clearly that Magdalene O'Brien would be given in marriage to settle the debt. It's binding. It's legal. Clayton smiled, and there was nothing pleasant in it. And it's mine. Around them, the crowd had swelled, miners finishing their morning shift, shopkeepers stepping out of stores, women with shopping baskets. Everyone wanting to see the confrontation between the Blackwood heir and the hermit who'd supposedly stolen a nun. Show me the contract, Ezra said. Clayton's smile widened. Don't have it on me, but I can produce it any time. Signed and witnessed. Your little romance doesn't change that. Maggie's debt to my family predates whatever sob story you two concocted. Then take it to a judge. Let the law decide. Oh, I will, but first, I'm going to make sure everyone in this town knows what you are. Clayton raised his voice, playing to the crowd. This man, Ezra Hawthorne, is the son of a thief and arsonist. His father burned down my father's warehouse. His mother went mad from the shame. And now he's trying to steal a woman promised to me. The Hawthorns are a poison in this community. Always have been. Something snapped inside Ezra. For 3 years, he'd absorbed the town's judgment in silence. He'd let them believe the worst because fighting it seemed pointless. But now, with Maggie's future on the line, with the truth about his father finally spoken aloud, silence felt like cowardice. My father was innocent. Ezra's voice rang clear across the street. The fire was caused by faulty wiring that your father refused to fix. My father was blamed because he'd been asking questions about safety violations, questions your family didn't want answered. Clayton's face flushed dark red. You're calling my father a liar? I'm calling him a murderer. Ezra swung down from his horse. Let Clayton see him at full height, 6'2" of mountain muscle and righteous anger. Just like he murdered Patrick O'Brien and 6 other men by deliberately collapsing that mine tunnel. The crowd gasped. Someone dropped a basket. The apples rolled into the street. Forgotten. Clayton's hand moved toward his jacket. Ezra saw the bulge there, recognized the shape of a pistol, but before Clayton could draw, another voice cut through the tension. That's enough. A man pushed through the crowd. Marshal William Garrett, 52 years old and tough as boot leather. He'd been marshal of Blackwood Hollow for 20 years, and he didn't tolerate violence in his streets. Both of you back down. Garrett positioned himself between Ezra and Clayton. Blackwood, keep your hand away from that gun. Hawthorne, get back on your horse. Marshal, this man is making slanderous accusations against my family. Clayton sputtered. Then sue him for slander. Don't shoot him in the street. Garrett's hand rested on his own revolver. Now both of you disperse before I throw you both in jail for disturbing the peace. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Clayton, with visible effort, stepped back. This isn't over, Hawthorne. Not by a long shot. I didn't think it was. Ezra remounted his mare. Before he rode away, he looked down at Clayton one more time. And Clayton, Maggie's not yours. She never was. People aren't property, no matter what contracts you wave around. He turned his horse and rode away, Sam following. Behind him, he heard Clayton shouting something, but the words were lost in the pounding of his own heartbeat. They'd crossed the Rubicon now. The confrontation was out in the open, and Ezra knew with absolute certainty that Clayton Blackwood would not let this stand. The question was, what would Clayton do about it? And more importantly, how could Ezra protect Maggie when she was locked behind convent walls? As if reading his thoughts, Sam spoke. You need allies, son. People willing to stand against the Blackwoods. Who in this town would do that? They're all on Blackwood payroll. Not all. Sam's voice carried a note of something Ezra couldn't quite identify. Hope, maybe, or determination. There are others who remember Patrick O'Brien, others who lost family in that collapse, Others who are just damn tired of being afraid. He looked at Ezra. Give me 2 days. Let me talk to some people. See who's willing to stand up. Sam, I can't ask you to risk yourself for this. You're not asking, I'm offering. The old man's face was set, stubborn. Besides, I owed your father. Never got the chance to make it right before he died. Maybe this is how I pay that debt. By helping his son. They reached the edge of town. Ezra pulled up, looked back at Blackwood Hollow. Somewhere in that collection of buildings and lives, Maggie sat in her convent cell, praying or thinking or planning. Somewhere Clayton Blackwood was plotting revenge. Somewhere the truth about multiple murders lay buried under years of silence and fear. And Ezra, who'd spent 3 years hiding from the world, was about to walk straight into the center of it all. 2 days, he said to Sam. Then what? Then we see who our friends are, and we make a plan to bring down the Blackwoods once and for all. Sam grinned, sudden and fierce. About damn time somebody did. As Ezra rode back up toward his mountain, he thought about Maggie's words from the night before, about how sometimes there's no good choice, only which kind of trouble you can live with. He'd chosen his trouble. Now he had to survive it. Sam, Ezra said as they reached the tree line, what happened to Moira O'Brien, Maggie's mother? Sam was quiet for a long moment, his weathered face thoughtful. Still living with that drunk Vincent Harding, far as I know. Living small, living scared. He paused. But I heard something interesting last week at Miller's store. Moira came in asking questions about her daughter, about Patrick's death, about that contract Vincent signed. After all these years? Grief works slow sometimes. Takes years to turn into something else. Anger, maybe. Or courage. Sam looked at Ezra. Woman who starts asking questions after staying silent for 11 years? That's a woman who's done being afraid. The words settled over Ezra like a promise. Maybe Maggie wasn't the only O'Brien woman finding her courage. And maybe, just maybe, he'd finally get justice for his father, safety for Maggie, and an end to the Blackwood reign of fear. Or maybe he'd end up like his father, destroyed by a power too big to fight. Either way, he was done running. The mountains rose before him, solid and eternal. By the time he reached his cabin, the sun had passed its zenith and started its afternoon descent. Ezra sat on his porch, as he had 1,000 times before, and watched the shadows lengthen across the valley. But this time he wasn't watching to hide. He was watching to plan. And somewhere below, Maggie was doing the same. 2 days passed like water over stone, slow and inevitable. Ezra spent them preparing. He cleaned his father's old rifle, oiled the action until it worked smooth as silk. He sharpened his knives. He chopped enough wood to last through winter, though he wasn't sure he'd be around to burn it. Physical work kept his hands busy while his mind churned through possibilities, contingencies, all the ways this could go wrong. On the afternoon of the second day, old Sam came riding up the mountain trail with 4 men behind him. Ezra recognized them all. Thomas Riley, the miner who'd been part of the search party, Jacob Miller from the general store, Doc Henry Morrison, the town physician, and bringing up the rear, Father Brennan Sullivan himself, looking oddly natural on horseback despite his clerical collar. Ezra met them in the clearing before his cabin. That's quite a delegation. Told you I'd find allies. Sam dismounted with the stiffness of a man whose joints had logged too many years. These boys have stories to tell, and Father Sullivan has news from the convent. They gathered on Ezra's porch, 6 men crowded into a space meant for one. Ezra brought out what hospitality he had: coffee, hardtack, some jerked venison. It wasn't much, but mountain courtesy demanded he offer what he could. Father Sullivan spoke first. I heard Maggie's confession yesterday. She asked me to tell you she's holding steady. Mother Superior is pressuring her to recommit to her vows, but Maggie's standing firm. The priest's eyes held a knowing warmth. She also wanted you to know that she meant everything she said, about you being the most decent man she's ever known. Something loosened in Ezra's chest. 2 days without word had felt like 2 years. Is she safe? For now, but Clayton Blackwood visited the convent yesterday, had a long conversation with Mother Superior behind closed doors. Father Sullivan's expression darkened. He left looking satisfied. That worries me. What did they discuss? Mother Superior wouldn't say, but I have sources among the sisters. He smiled slightly. Sister Bernadette has been very helpful. Apparently, Clayton showed Mother Superior the contract he claims gives him rights to Maggie. He also made a substantial donation to the convent building fund, $500. Ezra's jaw tightened. He's buying her cooperation. He's buying silence, Doc Morrison interjected. The doctor was 61 with liver-spotted hands and eyes that had seen too much suffering. Same way the Blackwood buy everything, with money and fear. He pulled out a worn leather folder, which is why I brought this. He opened the folder to reveal yellowed papers covered in neat handwriting, medical reports, autopsy findings. Patrick O'Brien's death, Doc Morrison said quietly, and the 6 other men who died in that collapse. I kept the real reports. The ones that show the injuries didn't match the official story. Ezra leaned forward. What do you mean? I mean Patrick O'Brien had a skull fracture that occurred before the collapse. Someone hit him on the back of the head with something heavy, probably a rock or a mining hammer. The collapse didn't kill him. He was already dead when the tunnel came down. Doc Morrison's voice shook slightly. I wrote it up honestly in my initial report. Luther Blackwood made me rewrite it. Said if I didn't, I'd lose my license and my practice. Said my family would suffer. So you changed it, Ezra said. No judgment in his voice, just fact. I changed it, and I've lived with that shame for 11 years. The doctor looked old suddenly, worn down by the weight of his silence. But I kept the originals, thought maybe someday they'd matter. Maybe today's that day. Thomas Riley spoke up next. I was there that day, in the mine. I was in a different tunnel when it happened, but I heard things. He was 55, built like a barrel, with coal dust permanently embedded in the creases of his face. There were explosions right before the collapse. Not one big blast like a cave-in, multiple smaller blasts, deliberate charges. Someone said explosives? Ezra felt cold despite the afternoon warmth. Had to be, and the only ones with access to blasting powder were the foremen, all of whom worked directly for Luther Blackwood. Riley's hands clenched into fists. 7 good men died that day. Patrick was my friend. His daughter deserves to know the truth. Jacob Miller, who'd been silent until now, cleared his throat. He was younger than the others, maybe 40, with the soft hands of a shopkeeper but steel in his spine. I have the account books. Luther Blackwood bought enough explosives that month to blast through half the mountain. But the official records show only routine mining operations. Where did the extra powder go? The picture was coming together, piece by damning piece. Luther Blackwood had murdered 7 men to silence Patrick O'Brien and anyone who might corroborate his testimony about safety violations. He covered it up with bribes, threats, and falsified records. And now his son Clayton was trying to complete the job by claiming Patrick's daughter as property. Why are you all telling me this now? Ezra looked at each man in turn. You've kept silent for 11 years. What changed? You changed it, Sam said simply. When you stood up to Clayton in the street, when you called Luther Blackwood a murderer in front of the whole town, you did what none of us had the courage to do. You spoke the truth out loud. And sometimes that's all it takes to break a dam of silence. Father Sullivan nodded. These men came to me after your confrontation, wanted to make confessions, to unburden their consciences. I told them confession was between them and God, but justice was a matter for the law. He paused. And for the community, which is why we're here, to ask you what you plan to do next. Ezra stood, paced to the edge of the porch. Below, the valley spread out in afternoon gold, Blackwood Hollow just visible through the haze. Such a small town to hold so much corruption, so much pain. I'm going to marry Maggie, he said, if she'll have me. Not because of some story we made up, but because he struggled to find words for feelings he'd only just begun to recognize. Because she deserves someone who'll stand beside her, someone who won't run when things get hard. And because I'm tired of being alone on this mountain, hiding from life. That won't stop Clayton, Riley pointed out. Even if you marry her, he'll fight it. He's got that contract. Then we break the contract. Prove it was made under duress, that Maggie's stepfather didn't have the right to sell her like livestock. Ezra turned back to face them. Can that be done, Father? Father Sullivan considered. Contracts made for immoral purposes are void in the eyes of the church and increasingly in the eyes of the law. If we can show that Clayton's intent was to essentially purchase a human being and that Maggie was coerced into this arrangement through her family's desperation, he nodded slowly. Yes, it could be challenged. We'd need a public hearing, Jacob Miller said. Get it all out in the open. Make Clayton defend his actions in front of the town. Marshal Garrett would have to preside, Doc Morrison added, and he's been on Blackwood payroll for 20 years. Maybe, Sam stroked his beard thoughtfully, but Garrett's also got a daughter. Might make him think twice about a world where girls can be sold like cattle. They talked for another hour, forming a plan. It was risky, full of holes, dependent on people acting better than their history suggested they would. But it was something, a path forward that didn't involve running or hiding or letting evil win by default. As the sun began its descent toward the ridgeline, the men prepared to leave. Father Sullivan was last to mount his horse. He looked at Ezra with an expression that was part approval, part concern. You know this will get dangerous, the priest said. Clayton won't let you take what he considers his property without a fight, and the Blackwoods have never hesitated to use violence when money doesn't work. I know, Ezra met his eyes, but I'm done letting fear make my decisions. My father lived in fear of what people would say, what they'd think. It killed him. I won't die the same way. No, Father Sullivan said softly. I don't think you will. God go with you, son. After they left, Ezra sat alone on his porch as darkness gathered. Tomorrow was Sunday, the day Maggie's week of discernment would end, the day she'd have to declare her choice, return to secular life and marry him, or take her final vows and disappear behind convent walls forever. He'd know her answer soon enough. But tonight, he allowed himself to imagine what it would mean if she said yes. A life shared instead of endured alone. Someone to talk to besides his own thoughts. Someone who looked at him and saw a man worth saving, not a hermit to be pitied or feared. The stars emerged one by one, ancient and indifferent to human struggles. An owl called from the pines. Life continuing its eternal rhythms while humans below wrestled with questions of justice and love and courage. Ezra didn't sleep that night. He sat vigil with his thoughts and his hopes and his fears, waiting for the dawn that would change everything. Sunday morning broke cold and clear, the kind of October day that hinted at winter's coming teeth. Ezra dressed carefully in his father's Sunday suit, brushed and aired out from the trunk where it had lain for 3 years. The fabric smelled of cedar and memory. His hands shook slightly as he buttoned the vest. He rode down the mountain as the sun climbed, taking his time, letting Ruth pick her way carefully over the rocky trail. No need to rush. Whatever was coming would wait. Blackwood Hollow's small church sat at the center of town, a white-painted building with a steeple that reached toward heaven like a finger pointing accusations at God. By the time Ezra arrived, the yard was already crowded. Word had spread as it always did in small towns. Everyone wanted to witness whatever would happen when Ezra Hawthorne came to claim his nun. They parted before him like water around a stone, conversations dying mid-word. He felt their stares, heard whispers follow him like a wake. Let them look. Let them talk. He was done caring what they thought. Father Sullivan met him at the church doors. She's inside, in the front pew with Mother Superior. Are you ready? As I'll ever be. The church interior was cool, dim after the bright morning. Rows of wooden pews stretched toward the altar. Every seat was full. This was theater, drama, the most interesting thing to happen in Blackwood Hollow in years. Of course they'd all come. Ezra saw Maggie immediately. She sat in the front row, wearing not her nun's habit, but a simple dress of deep blue that Sister Bernadette must have found for her. Her copper hair, grown out slightly in the week's passage, caught what light filtered through the stained glass windows. She didn't turn when he entered, but her spine straightened. She knew he was there. Mother Superior sat beside her, rigid as iron. On Maggie's other side, Sister Bernadette offered a small, encouraging smile. And across the aisle, in the opposite front pew, sat Clayton Blackwood, flanked by 6 men. Hired muscle, all of them. Rough-looking characters who hadn't come to worship. They'd come to intimidate. Ezra walked down the center aisle, his boots loud on the wooden floor. He took a seat in the second row, directly behind Maggie. close enough to speak to her if needed, far enough to respect the space this moment required. Father Sullivan moved to the altar. We are gathered this morning for a special purpose. Sister Magdalene O'Brien has completed her week of discernment. She must now declare her intention to take final vows as a bride of Christ, or to return to secular life and pursue a different calling. He looked at Maggie with kindness. My child, what is your decision? Maggie stood. She turned slowly, and for the first time since he'd entered the church, Ezra saw her face fully. She looked tired, as if the week had aged her. But her eyes were clear, her jaw set with determination. I choose to leave the convent, she said. Her voice carried to every corner of the sanctuary. I choose to return to the world. I choose. She looked directly at Ezra. I choose him. The church erupted in whispers. Mother Superior's face went rigid with fury, and Clayton Blackwood shot to his feet. Stop! His voice cracked like a whip through the sanctuary. This ceremony cannot proceed. Father Sullivan remained perfectly still, though Ezra caught a flash of something in the priest's eyes. Satisfaction, maybe. He'd been expecting this. Mr. Blackwood, what is the meaning of this interruption? Clayton strode into the center aisle, pulling a folded paper from his jacket. Magdalene O'Brien is bound to me by law. This document proves it. He thrust the paper toward Father Sullivan. She has no freedom to choose. She is mine. The priest took the document, unfolded it with deliberate slowness, and read. The sanctuary held its breath. When he looked up, his face was grave. This is a debt settlement agreement, signed by Vincent Harding, identifying himself as Maggie's stepfather. It promises her in marriage to you in exchange for forgiveness of $800. Father Sullivan's gaze shifted to Maggie. Child, did you consent to this arrangement? No, Father, I was 16. I fled to the convent to escape it. Clayton's smile was sharp. Her consent is irrelevant under territorial law. Her legal guardian at the time had the right to make such arrangements. The contract is valid. Perhaps by the letter of the law, Father Sullivan said. But we're not in a courtroom, Mr. Blackwood. We're in a house of God. And in God's house, we ask not what is legal, but what is moral. He held up the contract. Is it moral to sell a young girl to settle debts? Is it moral to treat a human being as property? That's not the question before us, Clayton snapped. The question is whether this woman can break a legally binding contract just because she's developed romantic notions about a mountain hermit. I have a question. Ezra stood up. Every eye in the church swung to him. Why do you want her so badly, Clayton? There are plenty of women in this territory. Why Maggie specifically? Clayton's face flushed. Because she's mine. The contract says so. No. Ezra took a step forward. That's not it. You want her because she's Patrick O'Brien's daughter. Because Patrick knew things about your father's business, knew about the safety violations, the corner cutting, the men who died because of Blackwood negligence. Those are slanderous lies, and you'll answer for them. Will I? Ezra kept moving forward, closing the distance. Or will you answer for them? Will you answer for the 7 men who died when your father deliberately collapsed a mine tunnel to silence witnesses? The church went dead silent. This was beyond gossip now. This was accusation of murder, spoken aloud in front of the entire community. Clayton's hand moved toward his jacket, but Marshall Garrett stood up from a back pew. Don't even think about it, Blackwood. Not in church. Marshall, this man is making false accusations, Clayton said, but there was a note of desperation in his voice now. Then we should investigate them properly. Doc Morrison rose from his seat. He held up the leather folder. I have evidence that Patrick O'Brien was murdered before the collapse. Medical evidence I've kept hidden for 11 years because I was afraid. I'm not afraid anymore. Thomas Riley stood next. I have testimony about explosives, about how that collapse was deliberate. Jacob Miller. I have financial records showing purchases of blasting powder that was never accounted for. One by one, the men who'd visited Ezra's cabin rose and spoke, each one adding another piece to the mosaic of evidence, each one reclaiming their courage, their voices, their power to speak truth. Clayton looked around wildly. He was losing control of the narrative, losing the town's complicity in his family's lies. This is a conspiracy. You're all in league against me. No, Father Sullivan said quietly. This is conscience. These men are unburdening themselves of silence that has poisoned them for years, and I, for one, intend to listen. And he looked at Marshal Garrett. Marshal, I think an official investigation is warranted. Garrett nodded slowly. He was an old man, close to retirement, and Ezra could see the calculation in his eyes. Side with the Blackwoods one more time, or finally do what was right. The marshal's gaze drifted to a woman in the third row, his daughter, watching him with an expression Ezra couldn't read. An investigation will be opened, Garrett said finally, into the 1883 mine collapse and the death of Patrick O'Brien. Until it's complete, all contracts involving the O'Brien family are suspended pending review. You can't do that. Clayton's composure was cracking now, rage breaking through the civilized veneer. I just did. Garrett's hand rested on his revolver. You got a problem with it. Take it up with the territorial court. But for now, Miss O'Brien is free of any obligation to you. Clayton's face went purple with fury. This isn't over. My father will hear about this. You'll all regret crossing the Blackwoods. Your father, Doc Morrison said quietly, is dying of liver disease. He has maybe 6 months left. I've been treating him, so I know. Which means you're running on borrowed authority, boy. And borrowed time. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. Luther Blackwood dying, the patriarch who'd ruled Blackwood Hollow for 3 decades fading away. It changed everything. Without Luther's iron fist, Clayton was just an angry young man with inherited money and no real power of his own. Clayton seemed to realize it too. He looked around the church, seeing not support but condemnation in every face. Even his hired muscle looked uncomfortable, unwilling to start violence in a sanctuary. Fine, Clayton said, his voice tight. Hide behind your investigation. Cower behind your priest and your marshal. But remember this, the Blackwoods own this town. We always have, and we always will. You think you can change that? You think one girl and a handful of guilt-ridden fools can bring us down? He laughed, bitter and harsh. You'll learn, just like Daniel Hawthorne learned, just like Patrick O'Brien learned. Cross the Blackwoods and you end up buried. He stormed toward the exit, his men following. At the door, he turned back one last time. Enjoy your wedding, Hawthorne. I'll enjoy your funeral. The door slammed behind him, echoing through the sanctuary like a gunshot. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Father Sullivan cleared his throat. Well, that was eventful. Now, I believe we had a different ceremony to discuss. Ezra Hawthorne, do you still wish to marry this woman? Ezra's eyes found Maggie's. She stood in the aisle, her expression a mixture of hope and fear, and something that might have been love, or might become it, given time. I do, Father, if she'll have me. Maggie? Father Sullivan asked gently. She walked toward Ezra, each step deliberate. When she reached him, she took his hands. Her fingers were cold, trembling slightly. Yesterday, when I was praying, I asked God to show me a sign, to tell me what path I should take. She smiled, fragile but real. Then you came into the church. You stood up for me. You risked everything for me. And I realize you're not the sign. You're the answer. She squeezed his hands. Yes, I'll marry you, not because I'm running from something, but because I'm running toward you. The church erupted in applause. Sister Bernadette was crying openly. Even Mother Superior, despite her rigid disapproval, didn't try to stop it. The tide had turned, and she was wise enough to know when she'd lost. Father Sullivan beamed. Then by the authority vested in me, and with this community as witness, I will perform the ceremony. Not today, as we need time to prepare properly and file the legal documentation, but soon, perhaps next Sunday? Next Sunday, Ezra agreed. A week to prepare. A week for the dust to settle. A week for Clayton to make whatever move he was planning. Because Ezra had no illusions. Clayton's threat wasn't idle. The Blackwoods didn't surrender. They retaliated. The congregation filed out slowly, everyone wanting to offer congratulations or advice, or just to be part of the story they'd tell their grandchildren. Ezra and Maggie stood together in the aisle, not quite touching, but close enough to feel each other's warmth. Are you scared? Maggie asked quietly. Terrified. Me too. She looked up at him, but less scared than I've been in years. Isn't that strange? Not strange, just honest. Ezra allowed himself a small smile. We're good at that now, being honest. Old Sam approached, gripping Ezra's shoulder. Son, you need to be careful this next week. Clayton's not going to let this stand. You should stay in town, where there's witnesses. Don't go back up the mountain alone. He's right, Marshal Garrett added. He'd lingered after most of the crowd left. I can't give you official precision, but I can make sure you're visible. Harder to make someone disappear when everyone's watching. What about Maggie? Ezra asked. I'm going back to the convent, Maggie said. Just for the week, to collect my things and say proper goodbyes. I'll be safe there. Even Clayton wouldn't attack a convent. Don't be so sure, Father Sullivan warned, but Sister Bernadette will watch over her, and I'll be checking in daily. They made arrangements. Ezra would stay at Old Sam's place in town. Maggie would remain at St. Catherine's under the unofficial guard of the sympathetic sisters. Father Sullivan would prepare the wedding ceremony. Doc Morrison, Thomas Riley, and Jacob Miller would compile their evidence for the formal investigation into the 1883 mine collapse. Everything was falling into place, almost too easily. That should have been Ezra's first warning. 3 days passed without incident. Ezra stayed in Sam's small house on the edge of town, helping with chores, visiting with the men who were building their case against the Blackwoods. He saw Maggie twice, brief meetings in the church courtyard under Father Sullivan's supervision. They talked about plans, about the cabin he'd need to expand, about the life they'd build together. She told him about her father, about memories she'd kept buried for 11 years, how Patrick had been teaching her to read plants, to understand which ones healed and which ones harmed, how he'd sung Irish songs while working in the garden, how he'd held her mother Moira gently, as if she were made of glass. He loved her so much, Maggie said, and she broke after he died, just shattered. I don't think she ever put herself back together. That's why she married Vincent. Not for love, but because she couldn't bear to be alone with her grief. Love makes us vulnerable, Ezra observed. Yes, but maybe that's not always bad. Maggie met his eyes. Maybe being vulnerable with the right person is how we heal. On the fourth day, everything went wrong. Ezra woke before dawn to pounding on Sam's door. He grabbed his knife, moved to the window. Marshal Garrett stood outside, his face grim in the pre-dawn darkness. Open up, Ezra. We got trouble. The marshal's tone sent ice through Ezra's veins. He opened the door. What happened? The convent. There was a fire last night. Small one contained to the kitchen, but in the confusion. Garrett paused, and in that pause, Ezra's world tilted. Maggie's gone. Disappeared. Sister Bernadette says she went to bed as normal, but this morning her cell was empty. Window was open. No sign of forced entry, but also no sign she left willingly. Ezra was moving before Garrett finished speaking, pulling on his boots, grabbing his coat. Clayton. That's my thinking too, but I can't prove it. His men say he was home all night. And without evidence, I don't need evidence. Ezra's voice had gone flat, cold. I need to find her. Son, if you go off half-cocked, if you do something rash, you'll end up in jail or dead. Let me investigate properly. How long will that take? A day? 2 days? A week? Ezra strapped on his knife belt, checked his father's revolver. She could be dead by then. Sam emerged from his bedroom, already dressed. I'm coming with you. Sam, you're 70 years old, and I can still shoot straighter than most men half my age. You're not doing this alone. By the time the sun rose, they had a search party of 12 men, the miners who testified at the church, Doc Morrison, Jacob Miller, even Marshal Garrett, operating in an unofficial capacity since he had no jurisdiction outside town limits. Father Sullivan met them at the church. His face was haggard, as if he'd aged 10 years overnight. I should have insisted she stay somewhere else. I should have known Clayton would try something. This isn't your fault, Father, Ezra said, though his hands trembled with suppressed rage. It's mine. I should have taken her up the mountain where I could protect her. Or maybe it's all of ours, Thomas Riley said. We pushed too hard, too fast, backed Clayton into a corner. Cornered animals are dangerous. Then we better find her before he proves just how dangerous. Ezra mounted his horse. Where would he take her? They searched for hours, the obvious places first. Clayton's mansion on the hill, locked up tight with servants who claimed to know nothing. The mining company offices empty on a weekday morning. The warehouses at the edge of town, all deserted. By midday, desperation clawed at Ezra's throat like a living thing. They'd regrouped in the town square, standing in a tight circle while curious townspeople watched from doorways and windows. The sun beat down merciless. Every minute that passed was a minute Maggie was alone with Clayton. "We're missing something," Ezra said, staring at the crude map Sam had sketched in the dirt with a stick. "Blackwood Hollow isn't that big. There aren't that many places to hide someone." "Unless he took her out of town entirely," Doc Morrison suggested. "Could be halfway to Charleston by now." No, the certainty came from somewhere deep in Ezra's gut. He wouldn't run. He wants us to know he won. He wants to make a point. Thomas Riley crouched beside the map, his coal-stained finger tracing lines. Making a point, his finger stopped. Jesus, the old mines. Marshall Garrett shook his head. "Those have been sealed for years. Most are too unstable to even enter." "Most." Riley looked up, his face grim. "But mine number 7, the one that collapsed in '83, the seal was always partial. And if someone wanted to make a statement about Patrick O'Brien, the pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Patrick had died in mine number 7. Clayton was obsessed with poetic justice, with proving the Blackwoods always won. That's where she is." Ezra was already moving toward his horse. "That's where he'd take her." "Son, wait." Marshall Garrett grabbed his arm. "If you're wrong, we waste hours searching a collapsed mine while she could be—" "I'm not wrong." Ezra met his eyes, and something in his expression made the marshal release him. "I know it the same way I knew she was in the creek that first day. I can feel it." Sam was already mounting his horse. "Then let's stop talking and start riding." "The mine's been abandoned for 11 years, Doc Morrison said. "Tunnels could be unstable. Going in there would be suicide." "Then I'll go alone." Ezra was already moving toward his horse. "The rest of you stay here. If I'm not back in 2 hours, assume the worst." "Like hell." Sam swung into his own saddle. "You really think we're going to let you play hero alone? We're all complicit now, son. We're all in this together." One by one, the others mounted up. Even Father Sullivan, who had no business going into a collapsed mine, insisted on coming. "Maggie is one of my flock," the priest said simply. "Where she goes, I follow." The old Blackwood mine number 7 sat 3 miles outside town, up a narrow valley that had been stripped of trees back in the boom days. Now saplings were reclaiming the land, but the mine entrance remained. A dark mouth in the hillside, boarded over with weathered planks warning of danger. Those planks had been removed recently. Fresh marks in the wood, nails pulled out cleanly. Someone had been here. Ezra dismounted, approached the entrance cautiously. The darkness inside was absolute, the smell of old earth and rot drifting out like breath from a tomb. "Maggie," he called. His voice echoed, swallowed by the darkness. "Maggie, are you in there?" Nothing. Just the whisper of wind through the valley and the nervous stamping of horses. Then faintly from deep within the mine, "Ezra!" Her voice, alive, terrified but alive. Ezra didn't think. He plunged into the darkness, Sam right behind him with a lantern. The others followed, a line of men descending into the earth like Dante's journey into the underworld. The main tunnel ran straight for 100 yards before branching. Water dripped from the ceiling, pooling on the uneven floor. The support timbers were rotten, sagging under tons of rock and soil. Every footstep raised small cascades of dirt from above. "This whole thing could come down," Riley whispered. As a miner, he knew the signs of instability. "We need to be quick." They followed Maggie's voice, calling out every few yards, using her responses to navigate the branching tunnels. Deeper they went, the air growing stale, the weight of the mountain pressing down from above. Finally, they reached a section that had been partially collapsed and then crudely reopened. Beyond it, in a small chamber lit by a single oil lamp, Maggie sat tied to one of the old mine carts. Ezra's heart stopped. Her dress was torn, dark stains on the fabric that could have been dirt or blood. Her face was streaked with grime, her copper hair matted against her skull. But when she looked up and saw him, her eyes blazed not with fear, but with fury and relief, and something that looked almost like triumph. She'd known he would come, And standing over her, holding a revolver with the casual ease of a man who'd never doubted his own power, was Clayton of Blackwood. "Took you long enough." Clayton's smile was all teeth. "I was beginning to think you didn't care about her after all." He looked disheveled, unshaven, nothing like the polished businessman from the church. "I was beginning to think you didn't care about her after all." Ezra raised his hands, showing they were empty. His revolver was in his belt, but drawing it would be suicide at this range. "Let her go, Clayton. This is between you and me." "Is it?" Clayton's laugh echoed strangely in the confined space. "I don't think so. I think this is between the Blackwoods and everyone who's ever tried to take what's ours. Your father tried, Patrick O'Brien tried, now you're trying, and you're all going to learn the same lesson." "Which is?" "That we always win." Clayton's finger moved to the trigger. "See, I thought about just killing you. Quick bullet, blame it on an accident. But that felt too easy. You humiliated me in front of the whole town. You turned people against my family. You deserve to suffer." He looked at Maggie. "So instead, I'm going to take her. Really take her this time. Make her my wife by force if necessary. And you're going to die knowing you failed to save her, just like your father failed to save your family." "You talk too much," Maggie said suddenly. Clayton turned to her, surprised. "What?" "I said you talk too much. It's boring. Are you going to shoot someone or just keep monologuing like a bad stage villain?" Despite everything, despite the gun and the danger and the tons of rock above them, Ezra almost smiled. That was his Maggie, defiant to the end. Clayton's face flushed with rage. "You little—" He raised the gun toward her, and that's when Sam's rifle cracked from the tunnel entrance. The shot was perfect, honed by 70 years of hunting in the mountains. It took Clayton in the shoulder, spinning him around, the revolver flying from his hand. He went down hard, screaming, clutching his arm. Men rushed forward. Marshall Garrett kicked Clayton's gun away. Doc Morrison knelt beside Maggie, cutting the ropes that bound her. Father Sullivan caught her as she stood, her legs shaky from hours of being tied. Ezra reached her in 3 long strides, pulled her into his arms. She came willingly, pressing her face against his chest, her body shaking with relief or shock or both. "I knew you'd come," she whispered. "I knew you wouldn't leave me." "Never." He held her tighter. "Never again." Behind them, Marshall Garrett was reading Clayton his rights, or what passed for rights in territorial justice. Kidnapping, assault, attempted murder. The charges were piling up, and even Blackwood money might not be enough to escape them all. "We need to get out of here," Riley said urgently. "This chamber isn't stable. All that shooting, the vibrations. Look at the ceiling." Ezra looked up. Cracks were spreading across the rock above them, dirt trickling down in steady streams. "Move!" Marshall Garrett grabbed Clayton, hauled him to his feet despite his protests. "Everyone out! Now!" They ran, back through the tunnels, the mountain groaning around them. Behind them, sections of the mine were collapsing, the old timbers finally giving up their long battle against gravity. Dust filled the air, making it hard to breathe, hard to see. Ezra kept one arm around Maggie, half carrying her, refusing to let go even when it slowed them down. They burst out of the mine entrance just as the main tunnel collapsed entirely, a great cloud of dust and debris belching from the opening like dragon's breath. They fell to the ground, outside, gasping, covered in dirt, alive. "Everyone accounted for?" Marshall Garrett called. One by one they answered, all 12 men who'd gone in, plus Maggie, plus even Clayton, lying on the ground groaning, blood seeping through his jacket from Sam's bullet. "Well, Maya," Father Sullivan said, brushing dirt from his cassock, "that was more excitement than I've had in 20 years of ministry." Despite everything, they laughed, the laughter of people who'd faced death and won, the laughter of relief and release and sheer joy at being alive. Later, after they'd returned to town, after Doc Morrison had patched up Clayton under Marshall Garrett's watchful eye, after Maggie had been checked for injuries and declared shaken but unharmed, they gathered in the church. All of them. The men who'd searched, the women who'd waited, the townspeople who'd heard the news and come running. Father Sullivan stood at the altar, but this wasn't a sermon. This was a reckoning. For too long, he said, This town has lived under the shadow of the Blackwoods. We've let them control us through fear, through money, through the threat of what they might do if we stood against them. And in our silence, in our complicity, we've allowed evil to flourish. He paused, looking out at the assembly. But today that ends. Today we stood together. We spoke truth. We risked everything to save one person, because one person's life matters. One person's freedom matters. And in doing so, we reclaimed our own freedom, our own dignity, our own souls. The church was silent, people absorbing his words. The investigation into the 1883 mine collapse will proceed, Marshal Garrett said, standing beside the priest. Based on the evidence Doc Morrison and others have provided, and based on Clayton Blackwood's own admission that his family always wins, I believe we have grounds for a full territorial inquiry. Justice will be served, finally. And this Sunday, Father Sullivan said, smiling at Ezra and Maggie, who sat in the front pew holding hands, we will celebrate a wedding. The union of two people who found each other in the darkest of times and chose love over fear, chose truth over lies, chose each other over safety. The congregation applauded. Maggie squeezed Ezra's hand so hard it hurt. He didn't mind. That night, after the crowds had dispersed, after the excitement had faded to weary satisfaction, Ezra and Maggie sat on the steps of the church. The stars wheeled overhead, infinite and ancient. Down in the valley, lights flickered in windows, life continuing. What happens now? Maggie asked. She'd changed into borrowed clothes, her hair washed clean of mine dust. In the starlight, she looked ethereal, almost fragile. But Ezra knew better. She was steel-wrapped in silk. Now we live, Ezra said. We get married. We build a life together. We help rebuild this town into something better than what it was. Will it be enough? After everything that's happened, after all the pain and loss, will it be enough just to live? Ezra considered the question. His father had died believing he'd failed, that standing for truth had been pointless. His mother had lost herself in grief and madness. For 3 years, Ezra had hidden from the world, convinced that was the only way to survive. But then he'd met Maggie, and she'd shown him that survival wasn't the same as living, that sometimes you had to risk everything to gain anything worth having. Yes, he said finally, it will be enough. Not because it erases the past or fixes everything that's broken, but because it's real, it's honest. It's two people choosing to face the world together instead of alone. And maybe that's all any of us can do. Face forward. Choose love. Choose life. Maggie leaned her head on his shoulder. I like that. Choose life. Not perfect life or easy life. Just life. Just life, Ezra echoed. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars, feeling the weight of the mountain at their backs and the promise of the valley spread before them. Tomorrow would bring challenges. The investigation into the Blackwoods would take months, maybe years. Rebuilding trust in a town built on fear wouldn't happen overnight. Building a marriage between two people who barely knew each other would take work, compromise, patience. But tonight, in this moment, they had something more valuable than certainty. They had hope. Ezra? Maggie said after a while. Yes? Tell me about the cabin. Tell me about our home. So he did. He described the log walls and the stone fireplace, the view from the porch where you could see 3 ridges stacked like waves frozen in time, the garden they'd plant next spring, the room they'd add for when children came, if they were blessed, the life they'd build log by log, day by day, choice by choice. And as he talked, he realized he was no longer describing a hermit's refuge. He was describing a home, a place of belonging, a place where two people could be fully themselves, fully honest, fully alive. Not perfect, never perfect, but real. And in the end, that was enough. 6 months later, on an April morning when the mountain laurel bloomed white and pink across the ridges, a visitor climbed the trail to the Hawthorne cabin. Father Sullivan came bearing news. The territorial investigation had concluded. Luther Blackwood had died 2 weeks prior, but not before confessing to multiple murders, including Patrick O'Brien's death. Clayton was in prison, sentenced to 20 years. The Blackwood mining operations had been sold, the proceeds divided among the families of the men who died in the 1883 collapse. Justice delayed but not denied. There's one more thing, Father Sullivan said as they sat on the expanded porch, drinking coffee while Maggie tended her medicinal garden below. Moira O'Brien, Maggie's mother, she's filed for divorce from Vincent Harding. She wants to see her daughter, if Maggie will have her. Ezra looked down at his wife, watching her work the soil with capable hands, humming an old Irish tune her father had taught her. That's Maggie's choice, he said, but I think she's been waiting for her mother to find the courage to choose herself, the way Maggie did. The way you both did. Father Sullivan raised his cup in a small salute. You've built something remarkable here, Ezra. Not just a home, but a life. A testament to what's possible when people choose courage over fear. Later, after Father Sullivan had gone, Ezra told Maggie about her mother. She cried as he'd known she would, but they were good tears, healing tears, the kind that washed away old pain to make room for new growth. That night, as they lay in bed listening to the mountains settling around them, Maggie spoke into the darkness. Do you ever think about that day, at the creek? Every day. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd walked away? If you'd chosen not to help me? No, Ezra said honestly, because I can't imagine my life without you now, and I don't want to. Good answer, she snuggled closer. Though you know the funny thing, Mother Superior still insists we were living in sin that night you sheltered me. Says our marriage doesn't count because it was based on lies. Does that bother you? Not even a little. Because the lie led to truth, and the fear led to courage, and being lost led to being found. She paused. We're not defined by how our story started, Ezra. We're defined by how we chose to continue it. Outside, an owl called. A creek murmured over stones. Life continued its ancient patterns. And inside the cabin, two people who'd found each other in the darkest of times slept peacefully, knowing that whatever tomorrow brought, they'd face it together. Not because they had to, because they chose to. And in the end, that choice made all the difference.